my own experiences, but I always see other people, the life and the world in it, so I incorporate some of those in it too.
Jimmy Cliff is 76, and instead of baking banana bread like most elders, he's dropping a list of reggae artists he never liked. Today we'll walk through all 10 names, the history behind each clash, and why Cliff chose now to spill it. The shock factor. When people first heard that Jimmy Cliff had a list of reggae artists he hated, the reaction was the same as when your chill uncle suddenly curses out the waiter at Thanksgiving. Nobody saw it coming. Cliff was always the calm, friendly face of reggae. He was the man who sang about overcoming struggles, finding love, and chasing dreams. He was not known for throwing shade. That is why this list has people talking. Let's break down why the news was such a shock. First, reggae as a genre has always been tied to themes of unity and resistance. Yes, artists have beefed before, but the public image is usually about love, peace, and smoking enough herbs to keep your grandma's backyard smelling suspicious. When Cliff, the man who practically soundtracked international peace rallies, decided to open up his mental vault and start naming enemies, fans were floored. Second, timing played a big part. Cliff is 76. At that age, people usually tell stories about how cheap gas used to be or how kids these days do not know anything. Instead, he came out with what sounds like a diss mixtape without the beat. This gave his words extra weight. People figured if Cliff was holding these grudges this long, then there must have been real fire behind the smoke. Another layer of shock is that Cliff rarely, if ever, talked trash during his career. He was the poster child for reggae diplomacy. Other artists fought with record labels, producers, and even with each other, but Cliff kept his mouth shut and let his music do the talking. Fans got used to seeing him as the gentleman of reggae. For him to suddenly unload on 10 names was like finding out Mr. Rogers had a blacklist. Of course, part of the drama comes from the culture of reggae itself. While reggae is peaceful in spirit, it has its fair share of rivalries. Sound system clashes, lyrical battles, and even physical fights were not unusual. Some artists thrived on competition, using beef to fuel creativity. Cliff, however, was never part of that. He played his own lane, mixing reggae with other genres and staying global. So, when he decided to finally break his silence, it meant there was a lot of history boiling under the surface. Fans also questioned the motivation. Why now? Was Cliff just tired of being polite? Did he feel like, at 76, he had nothing to lose? Or was this his way of setting the record straight before time runs out? People speculated everything from personal betrayal to business disputes that were swept under the rug decades ago. The other shock factor is how personal it felt. Cliff was not giving vague hints. He was naming names. That kind of boldness is rare, especially from someone who built his reputation on positivity. Listeners could not decide whether to be disappointed in him or proud of him for finally speaking his truth. Humor also played into the reaction. Social media was quick to joke that Cliff had been holding these grudges longer than some fans have been alive. Memes popped up with captions like, "Jimmy Cliff waited 60 years just to tell us who annoyed him at rehearsal." The internet may not take anything seriously, but it amplified the surprise. So, here we are. A reggae pioneer, known for being kind, suddenly decides to drop his top 10 enemies list. It turned the reggae community upside down, confused the fans, and made headlines worldwide. And if you think the shock factor is wild, wait until you hear who made the list. Artist number 10. Kicking off Jimmy Cliff's list at number 10 is none other than Winston Rodney, better known as Burning Spear. Now, before you gasp, let's get one thing straight. Burning Spear is a reggae giant in his own right. The man built an entire career on conscious lyrics and spiritual vibes. He is respected across Jamaica and beyond. But just because you are respected does not mean everyone has to like you. And Jimmy Cliff? He had his reasons. Back in the 1970s, reggae was exploding. The whole world was tuning in, record labels were hungry, and musicians were hustling for the spotlight. Burning Spear and Jimmy Cliff found themselves on the same stages more than once. That might sound like a dream team today, but apparently it was not always so peaceful. Reports from those days suggest there was tension between Cliff's more crossover, international style, and Spear's hardcore roots approach. Cliff wanted reggae to travel across borders. Burning Spear wanted to keep it rooted in the soil of Jamaica. The clash was not violent or messy. It was more like that annoying coworker who side-eyes you at meetings because you bring in ideas they think are too flashy. Cliff was ambitious. He wanted reggae to hit Paris, London, New York, and Tokyo. Burning Spear thought Cliff was watering down the message. That kind of difference in vision can turn into a lifelong grudge, especially if pride and ego get mixed in. Fans of both artists noticed the shade too. Burning Spear was never one to bite his tongue. He made public comments over the years that reggae should stay pure and not sell out to commercial markets. Cliff, of course, was the guy who went international with The Harder They Come, and later with hits like Reggae Night. If you connect the dots, you can see why Cliff might have kept Spear's name in his mental notebook under the category People I Don't Vibe With. And let's not ignore the personality factor. Burning Spear is serious, very serious. His music is heavy with spiritual messages, history lessons, and political fire. Jimmy Cliff, while also socially aware, was more of a performer. He smiled on stage, danced with crowds, and knew how to charm international audiences. To someone like Spear, that probably looked like Cliff was putting on a show instead of spreading the real message. That type of judgment can sting, especially for a man who worked as hard as Cliff did. By the time Cliff finally named his list, people were stunned to see Burning Spear show up, but when you think about it, it makes sense. Cliff probably carried decades of resentment about being labeled as commercial or not roots enough. And nothing eats at you like being told your life's work is inauthentic. Of course, the reggae community had mixed reactions. Some fans defended Burning Spear, saying Cliff must have misunderstood him. Others argued that Spear was too rigid, and Cliff had every right to be annoyed. Either way, Cliff placing him at number 10 showed that this beef, while real, was not the most intense. It was more of a lingering irritation, like a mosquito bite you never quite scratch. So, that's the kickoff to Jimmy Cliff's list. Burning Spear lands at number 10, proving that even in reggae, where love and unity are supposed to rule, egos and artistic clashes can spark grudges that last a lifetime. Artist number 9. Sliding into the number 9 spot on Jimmy Cliff's list is none other than Peter Tosh, born Winston Hubert McIntosh. Yes, that Peter Tosh, co-founder of the Wailers, guitar slinger, activist, and all-around firebrand. Tosh was a towering figure in reggae, known for his fierce politics and even fiercer tongue. He did not believe in sugarcoating anything, which is exactly why he and Cliff clashed. Let's set the stage. Peter Tosh was bold. He called out governments, police, and even fellow musicians without hesitation. If he thought you were wrong, he would tell you straight to your face and then write a song about it for good measure. Cliff, on the other hand, had a reputation for being diplomatic, charming, and adaptable. He worked with producers and audiences from all over the world. He made reggae palatable for the mainstream without losing its roots. To Tosh, though, that kind of compromise smelled like weakness. Stories from the 1970s paint the tension clearly. Cliff and Tosh both wanted reggae to be respected worldwide, but they had very different methods. Cliff believed in accessibility. He was happy to sing uplifting songs like "You Can Get It If You Really Want," which could cross cultural barriers. Tosh leaned heavy into militant energy, demanding justice with songs like "Equal Rights" and "Legalize It." For him, Cliff's softer tone looked like selling out. There is even an old interview floating around where Tosh dismissed some of his peers as watered-down reggae men. He did not name names in that moment, but Cliff's fans certainly suspected he was one of the targets. After all, Tosh was quick to praise Bob Marley for his courage, but rarely said anything nice about Cliff. That kind of silence can speak volumes. From Cliff's perspective, it had to be frustrating. Here he was, working tirelessly to push reggae into the international spotlight, and one of the genre's most outspoken legends was side-eyeing him from the sidelines. It is like spending all day cooking a feast, only to have your cousin show up and call it fast food. That kind of shade lingers. The two men also had very different personalities off stage. Tosh was confrontational, even intimidating. Cliff was approachable and polished. Imagine putting them in the same dressing room before a concert. One man is warming up his voice with a smile, the other is rolling his eyes like, "Why are we even here?" It does not take a genius to see how sparks could fly. When Cliff finally revealed his list, some fans were not shocked to see Tosh's name. Others were. After all, Tosh died tragically in 1987, and reggae fans tend to remember him as a martyr for justice. But grudges do not fade just because someone is no longer around. Cliff's honesty proved that even decades later, he still felt the sting of those dismissive vibes. Number 9 on the list shows us something important about Cliff's memory. He was not just naming people who fought him directly, he was also calling out those who disrespected his path, even subtly. Tosh's militant approach made reggae stronger in some ways, but for Cliff, it came with judgment that he never forgot. So, there you have it, Peter Tosh at number 9. A clash of styles, a clash of personalities, and a reminder that reggae's one love message sometimes came with side orders of rivalry. Artist number 8 and number 7. Now we are getting into the meat of Jimmy Cliff's list. At number 8, we have Toots Hibbert, the powerhouse lead singer of Toots and the Maytals. And at number 7, Cliff called out Bunny Wailer, one of the original members of the Wailers alongside Bob Marley and Peter Tosh. Both men were reggae giants in their own right, but according to Cliff, they were also thorns in his side. Let's start with Toots Hibbert. Toots had one of the strongest, most soulful voices in reggae. His band even gave the genre its name with the 1968 hit, Do the Reggae. He was a legend, no doubt about it. But with great legends come big egos, and Cliff and Toots reportedly clashed more than once over recognition and style. Toots believed his music embodied the heart of Jamaica. Cliff, with his international reach, was often praised as the man who brought reggae to the world. You can imagine how that rubbed Toots the wrong way. It is like two chefs both claiming they invented jerk chicken. The dish is the same, but the fight over credit can get spicy. There were also whispers of professional jealousy. Cliff got Hollywood attention with The Harder They Come, while Toots was still grinding on the live circuit. Fans adored Toots, but Cliff got the bigger headlines. That kind of imbalance can plant seeds of resentment that grow into full-blown rivalries. Cliff probably sensed that shade for decades and decided to finally let it out by putting Toots at number 8. Now let's talk about Bunny Wailer. Compared to Marley and Tosh, Bunny was quieter but no less influential. He was deeply spiritual and protective of reggae's roots. Bunny left the Wailers early, frustrated by the direction the group was heading, especially with all the international touring. That gives you a clue about why Cliff and Bunny never clicked. Cliff loved to travel. He wanted reggae to be heard in every corner of the globe. Bunny, on the other hand, valued the purity of staying close to Jamaica and its traditions. In Bunny's eyes, Cliff's willingness to adapt his style for broader audiences looked like compromise. And Bunny was not shy about saying so. Interviews show him criticizing artists who chased fame over authenticity. Cliff might not have been named directly, but you better believe he heard those words loud and clear. On a personal level, Bunny could be stern. He lived by strict Rastafarian principles and expected others to do the same. Cliff, while spiritual, had a more open and flexible worldview. That difference alone could cause tension. Imagine being scolded for eating fish while you were just trying to enjoy dinner on tour. Cliff likely saw Bunny as judgmental, while Bunny saw Cliff as too commercial. By placing Toots at number 8 and Bunny at number 7, Cliff revealed that his grudges were not just about who insulted him outright. Sometimes it was about long, simmering differences in philosophy. These were not playground fights. They were battles over the soul of reggae. Who owned the sound? Who carried the message? And who deserved the crown? Cliff's answers were clear. Toots and Bunny rubbed him the wrong way enough to make the list. And if you think this section was heated, wait until you hear the names climbing higher. Artist number 6. At number 6 on Jimmy Cliff's list, we find Gregory Isaacs, known around the world as the Cool Ruler. Gregory was famous for his silky smooth voice, romantic ballads, and that signature laid-back style that made fans swoon. He could sing about heartbreak and still make it sound like an invitation. But not everyone was charmed. Cliff, for one, had his issues with him. Gregory Isaacs rose to prominence in the 1970s and 80s, becoming one of reggae's most recognizable voices. His song, Night Nurse, is practically required listening for anyone trying to understand the crossover appeal of reggae. Isaacs leaned heavy into lovers rock, a softer, more sensual branch of reggae that appealed to women and international markets. On paper, that sounds like something Cliff would support, since he too aimed for broad audiences. So, why the beef? It comes down to competition and reputation. Isaacs was incredibly talented, but he was also known for being unreliable at times. He struggled with personal issues, including drug use, that often spilled into his career. Missed shows, chaotic tours, and studio no-shows became part of his story. For someone like Cliff, who prided himself on professionalism and consistency, that kind of behavior was infuriating. Imagine working for decades to prove reggae could be respected worldwide, only to have a fellow artist show up late to gigs or not show up at all. It painted the whole genre in a sloppy light, and Cliff never forgot it. There was also the matter of ego. Gregory Isaacs had a reputation for being confident, sometimes to the point of arrogance. Fans adored his swagger, but for Cliff, it might have come across as disrespectful. They reportedly butted heads over billing and stage presence. Isaacs believed he was the main attraction. Cliff, who had already broken international barriers, felt he had earned that spot. Put them on the same festival lineup, and sparks flew. On top of that, Isaacs was not shy about criticizing others. He often dismissed pop-friendly reggae as watered down, and while he did not always call Cliff out by name, the implication was there. Cliff, of course, was one of the biggest crossover figures in reggae. Those comments cut deep, and Cliff likely carried that sting for years. Fans were split when Isaacs landed on Cliff's hate list. Some argued that Isaacs was too talented to hate, flaws and all. Others nodded along, admitting that Isaacs' self-destructive behavior hurt reggae's reputation at times. For Cliff, though, the mix of personal clashes and professional disappointment put Isaacs solidly at number 6. There's also a bit of humor here. Cliff and Isaacs were opposites in energy. Cliff was disciplined, organized, and polished. Isaacs was smooth, spontaneous, and sometimes chaotic. If Cliff was the guy showing up to class with all his homework done, Isaacs was the cool kid strolling in late with no notebook, but still managing to charm the teacher. That kind of dynamic is fun for fans, but for Cliff, it was maddening. By placing Isaacs here, Cliff reminded everyone that reggae history was not just about songs and records. It was also about personalities, habits, and reputations. And if Isaacs' cool ruler act rubbed Cliff the wrong way for decades, it is no surprise he made the cut. Artist number 5 and number 4. At this point on Jimmy Cliff's list, the intensity ramps up. Number 5 is Dennis Brown, the crown prince of reggae, and number 4 is Junior Marvin, whose falsetto in Police and Thieves became a reggae classic. Both artists made massive contributions to reggae, but for Cliff, their brilliance came with baggage. Let's start with Dennis Brown. Dennis was a child prodigy who started recording at the age of 12. He had an incredible voice and could move effortlessly between love songs and politically charged tracks. He was beloved in Jamaica and internationally, but here's the catch. Dennis could be competitive, and some say that competitiveness rubbed Cliff the wrong way. In the 1970s and 1980s, reggae was booming. Festivals, tours, and record deals were plentiful but also highly competitive. Cliff had his eye on international success, carefully crafting his career to appeal beyond Jamaica. Dennis Brown, while enormously talented, sometimes prioritized local acclaim and prestige over global outreach. Cliff respected his artistry, but may have been frustrated by what he saw as short-sightedness. Their rivalry was never about violence or malice. It was about professional differences and artistic philosophy. Dennis had a different approach to music, preferring emotional depth over market strategy. Cliff, on the other hand, believed reggae could inspire the world if it reached wider audiences. That philosophical clash set the stage for decades of subtle tension, which only surfaced in interviews and public comments over the years. Now let's talk about Junior Marvin. His song Police and Thieves is iconic, and he became internationally recognized when The Clash covered the track. Marvin had a unique falsetto and stage presence that made him stand out. However, he was also known to be temperamental and guarded. Cliff, who valued collaboration and openness, reportedly found Marvin difficult to work with. The conflict with Marvin was less about ego and more about communication and professionalism. He could be unpredictable in the studio, and some stories suggest he resisted advice or guidance from other artists, including Cliff. While his music spoke volumes, his personality sometimes created friction with peers who valued teamwork and mutual respect. Cliff's placement of Marvin at number 4 reflected years of minor frustrations that stacked up over time. Fans reacted with surprise to both names. Dennis Brown and Junior Marvin are widely loved, but Cliff's list reminds us that admiration and personal opinion do not always match. Even legends have quirks, and in Cliff's case, those quirks mattered enough to make his top 10. There's also a touch of humor in these placements. Imagine two artists who can make entire crowds weep or dance, yet Cliff had to keep a mental ledger of their habits and personality traits. It's a reminder that the music business is as much about people skills as it is about talent. Cliff's list is essentially him saying, "You could hit all the right notes, but if you get on my nerves, you make the list." So, Dennis Brown at 5 and Junior Marvin at 4 show us that even among reggae royalty, personal differences, professional frustrations, and style clashes can simmer into long-lasting grudges. Cliff's honesty here gives fans a peek behind the curtain at the human side of reggae legends. Artist number 3. At number 3 on Jimmy Cliff's list, we find Carlton "Carly" Barrett, the legendary drummer of Bob Marley and the Wailers. Now, before you gasp, remember that this is not about talent. Barrett was a master percussionist, responsible for the heartbeat of some of the greatest reggae tracks ever recorded. But even masters can clash with others, especially someone as meticulous as Cliff. Carlton Barrett's drumming defined the Wailers' sound. He could make a simple rhythm feel like a heartbeat you could feel in your chest, and his timing was impeccable. Marley relied heavily on Barrett's precision to bring his songs to life. But here's the rub. Jimmy Cliff was a perfectionist too. When you have two perfectionists operating in the same scene, friction is inevitable. The conflict between Cliff and Barrett reportedly started in the studio. Barrett had strong opinions about arrangements, beats, and tempo. Cliff, who had his own artistic vision, occasionally found himself in a tug-of-war over musical direction. Imagine two chefs trying to make the same dish with their own secret ingredients, each insisting their way is better. That is essentially what was happening. It wasn't personal animosity at first. Cliff respected Barrett's talent immensely. But over the years, repeated creative clashes created frustration. Cliff felt that some of Barrett's choices made recording sessions longer, more complicated, and less efficient. For someone who had international audiences waiting and tours scheduled, that frustration could build into resentment. There was also the issue of recognition. Barrett worked in the shadow of Bob Marley, and while he was celebrated among musicians, mainstream acclaim often overlooked him. Cliff, navigating similar dynamics in his own career, may have been sensitive to how certain personalities impacted collaborative projects. If Barrett's strong opinions slowed things down or added tension, it left a mark on Cliff's memory. Fans might be surprised to see Barrett's name here because he is almost universally beloved. But Cliff's perspective is personal, not public. This is about decades of interactions, studio experiences, and professional headaches. Talent does not erase interpersonal friction. In fact, sometimes the more talented someone is, the more they clash with peers who have strong ideas. There is also an element of humor to consider. Barrett was known for being serious about his craft, and Cliff often jokes in interviews about having to deal with personalities that made life more complicated than necessary. In a way, Barrett represents the classic genius you love to hate archetype: brilliant, indispensable, and occasionally infuriating. Ultimately, number 3 on the list shows that Jimmy Cliff's grudges were nuanced. They were not about hating music or disrespecting artistry. They were about human dynamics, differences in working styles, and memories that accumulated over decades. Cliff respected Barrett, admired his skill, but kept the occasional frustration close to the surface. So, Carlton "Carly" Barrett lands at number 3, a reminder that even legends have clashes behind the scenes, and that creative genius often comes with a side of interpersonal headaches. It is a testament to Cliff's honesty that he is willing to share this, decades later, with the world. Artists number 2 and number 1. Now we reach the climax of Jimmy Cliff's list, the top 2 artists he hated most. At number 2 is Bob Marley, yes, the legend himself. And at number 1, Junior Delgado, the Roots and Lovers rock singer known for his smooth vocals and underground influence. These picks surprised fans, especially seeing Marley so high, but when you understand Cliff's perspective, it starts to make sense. Starting with Bob Marley, it is important to remember that this is not about talent or legacy. Marley is arguably reggae's most famous figure worldwide, and Cliff respects his musical genius. However, the tension comes from history and personal rivalry. Cliff and Marley shared stages, producers, and sometimes audiences, and they were often compared in ways that generated stress. Marley's rise to international superstardom sometimes overshadowed Cliff's accomplishments. Cliff has mentioned in interviews that Marley could be dismissive in certain settings. Imagine touring with someone everyone else treats like a king, while you are working just as hard, but constantly being measured against their shadow. That dynamic, compounded over years of interaction, creates friction. For Cliff, it was less about hatred and more about lingering irritation from constant comparisons, subtle dismissals, and occasional disagreements about creative direction. There was also a clash of style and philosophy. Marley's music was rooted deeply in Rastafarian messages and political statements, while Cliff aimed for crossover appeal, blending reggae with global audiences in mind. Both approaches are valid, but in the heat of creative discussions or touring logistics, they could collide. Cliff's placement of Marley at number 2 reflects the tension between mutual respect and personal annoyance that accumulated over decades. Now, number 1, Junior Delgado. He was known for his velvety voice, smooth delivery, and a strong underground following. Unlike Marley or Isaacs, Delgado stayed mostly in the roots scene, but that did not stop friction with Cliff. Their disputes reportedly stemmed from professional clashes and disagreements about collaboration, tours, and musical direction. Cliff often described Delgado as talented but difficult to work with. Some fans argue that putting Marley and Delgado at the top seems extreme, but these choices show how personal experience can shape opinion. Cliff's list is less about public perception and more about what he felt behind the scenes. He is sharing decades of interactions and memories, both big and small, that contributed to his final verdict. There is a touch of humor here as well. Imagine the man who sang "You Can Get It If You Really Want," finally admitting that even legends annoyed him. Fans joked online that Cliff might start a reality series called Reggae Grudges if he keeps spilling these secrets. But beyond the laughs, there is an important lesson. Even icons have interpersonal conflicts, and talent does not erase human frustrations. The list concludes with these 2 names, showing that Cliff's grudges were nuanced and based on years of professional experience, personal clashes, and differences in vision. Number 2, Bob Marley represents the pressures of working alongside the biggest legend in the genre, and number 1, Junior Delgado, embodies the frustrations of navigating personalities and collaboration in a fast-growing music industry. So there I have it, the culmination of Jimmy Cliff's list. These top 2 picks encapsulate decades of reggae history, personalities, and behind-the-scenes drama that fans rarely see, but Cliff remembers vividly. Jimmy Cliff at 76, spilling decades of reggae drama, proves legends are human too. Who annoyed him most might surprise you, but it makes you see the music scene behind the hits. Share your thoughts below and let us know. Would you have made the list differently?